morning and welcome to the breakfast show on Faith FM with Skafy and friends. This is the best place to start your day with positive and uplifting thoughts. You're listening all across Australia on 87.6, 87.8 or 88 depending on your location. You can also listen to us through our Faith FM app, which can be downloaded for absolutely free. Today, if you're listening live, is Thursday the 5th of February 2026. However, this show will age very well. Why? Because today is a special program. I have a special guest here with me, Pastor Adam Ramdin, who is also a historian. He is going to be helping us today to understand the history of the Reformation. So hang tight, buckle your seatbelts. Today's show is going to be absolutely amazing, incredible, and we are going to definitely play it in other occasions for those who couldn't make it while it was live. But first up, I'd like to say a big welcome and a good morning to you, Adam. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having us here. It's good to be here.
And of course, how can we forget the unforgettable producer Shell? She's sitting at the desk. Good morning to you, producer Shell.
Good morning. Looking forward to today's show.
Me too. Well, let's start with you a little bit, Adam. Before we ask about you, we have this tradition in our show that we give a word of gratitude in the morning. We greet each other with something we're grateful for. It can be anything, but I am grateful today. Well, this is a Reformation themed show after all. I am very grateful for the Reformers, but I'll tell you which one is one of my favorite Reformers.
Okay.
Is Jacob Arminius.
Yeah.
I really like him. Yep. I love how he really centered things around God's love at a time where everybody was kind of following after John Calvin and the double predestination, sovereignty of God, which had an absolute purpose to play and a role to play in the time that it was proposed. But Arminius, I just have a soft spot for him.
No, his theological unearthings were key in understanding the gospel.
What about you? So, what was your gratitude? Maybe you would like to give a Reformation-sized gratitude as well.
I should follow in your theme. My favorite would probably be William Tyndale, and the reason for that is he's the one who really translates the Bible in modern times into the English language. So it's very much in some ways an English orientated thing, but he translated the English language, and his translation forms the bedrock of really the English language we speak today. Many of his phrases and terminologies have kind of seeped into common everyday speak.
Wow.
And he was very influential in the very language we speak today.
This is actually quite remarkable to think of, like how one person can have such an impact hundreds of years after doing something. Yeah. And then we are all talking and using phrases coined by him, which we have, we don't even know where it's coming from, but we can trace the origin. Yeah. That's really amazing. Well, in today's show, just to give a heads up, what some of the themes that we're going to be covering. We're going to be looking at what is the Reformation? When we talk about Reformation, what are we talking about? Can we see Reformation in the Bible, in the Old Testament? Can we see Reformation in the New Testament? And why did we even ended up in need of a Reformation? So what was the deformation of the church? How it happened? Was it gradually? Was it something that happened overnight? And after this deformation, who were the men and perhaps also the women who made a difference, who brought back, hey, let's get back into the Bible here. We're going to be exploring that. And at the end of our show, I'm going to ask you a provocative question, meaning, are we still in need of a new Reformation today?
You're listening to the Breakfast Show podcast on Faith FM. Positively different.
And producer Shell has a Reformation quiz question today. So please, producer Shell.
Indeed. Our first one for today. What document nailed to a church door in 1517 is considered the spark that ignited the Protestant Reformation? If you know that answer, text us on 0491-064-669. What document nailed to a church door in 1517 is considered the spark that ignited the Protestant Reformation?
There you go. I think I know this one. Do you know this one, Adam?
I think so.
Okay. Well, we might talk we might
know this one. Or
we
else
might
we
talk
got the
about
wrong
it actually
expert.
later today.
There's debate though over that, you know.
Oh, well, there you go.
Ooh, we'll
we
talk about it
want
when
to
we give
hear.
the answer.
Yes, we want to hear all the gossips, the debates, the stuff that often we don't hear about. Adam, before we start, I am wanting to know a little bit more about you. I can pick up a nice accent from some part of in Europe. So can you tell us a little bit about where you're from and your family? Tell us a bit about yourself.
The accent is a debate as well because people can't often place that. But I live in England. I was born and raised in England and I've lived there for the majority of my life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. And what about your family? Are you married? Do you have children?
So I'm married. I have wife and 2 children. My children, I have a son who's 6, almost 7, will be 7 later on this month, and a daughter who's 3.5. And we live there in England. We're actually all here together in Australia, so it's very, very nice, or very, it's a privilege that we could travel here together and spend some time as a family. So yeah,
Absolutely. And what do you do back in England? How do you occupy most of your time there?
Currently, I spend most of my time with a ministry called Lineage Journey. It's a Christian media ministry. We create content primarily based on looking at the past, where we've come from, our Christian heritage. We started about 8 or 9 years ago as a side project, and then they kind of grew and grew and grew. And I was at the time serving in our church as a conference director, as a youth director, and then a personal ministry. So I made the decision to kind of leave that employment and do the ministry full time, and that was about 3 years ago. So that's what I do most of the time. I also work now 25% for the church organization.
Okay, very good. So Lineage, tell us a little bit about it. So is it a YouTube channel? Is it an Instagram channel? Is it what kind of media are you in?
All of the above. So we have a website, that's lineagejourney.com. Our YouTube page is Lineage Journey, Instagram Lineage Journey. We have Lineage Journey as our handle across all social media platforms. If anyone's listening and wants to check it out, Instagram is a Lineage Journey, YouTube Lineage Journey, Twitter Lineage Journey. Though the platforms we're most active on is YouTube and then Instagram.
Okay.
YouTube is where the episodes are all housed. Instagram has the shorts and reels and things like that. But
and how big are usually the episodes on YouTube? Is that a specific format that you follow?
Yeah,
or it
we've gone for the short form content is kind of our space, and our videos are all around 5 to 6 minutes long, and that's kind of the short shareable space that we're in. We haven't really formed anything long, like an hour. We've done maybe 1 or 2 in the last 8, 9 years, but most of our content, we've got about 350 episodes, I think, that are 5, 6 minutes long.
Okay. And then from I've seen, I'm actually a big fan of your work. When I first found, I was like, hey, who's this guy? This is amazing. He's such a good quality. I think I started following it maybe 7 or so years ago.
Okay.
So it has been a while. It was not at the absolute beginning, but I think it was pretty early on. There were not, I think that there were just the first videos coming out.
Oh, okay.
But one of the things that I loved was not only getting to know more about the history, but it's not that you're sitting against an office or a green screen, are you? So you do go and you visit Christian historical sites.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's the other, I think, key thing that we do is that I'd say 95, 96, somewhere between 95 and 100% of what we film it on location. So we've never filmed any of our episodes in a studio. So when we're talking about Martin Luther at Wartburg Castle, we'll be standing by Wartburg Castle. If we're talking about John Wesley and where he grew up, we'll be by his childhood home. So we film everything outdoors, unless it's obviously inside one of those locations, and it's all on location. And I think that gives it a sense of authenticity, that it's not just like a graphic behind. And there's nothing wrong with that if people don't have the opportunity to travel. Yeah. There's many people that do create content like that, and that's fine. But, because we're located in Europe and most of the things we film are in Europe or in that old world part of our planet, we have been able to travel to these places and film them on site and on location. And,
wow. Yeah. That's very exciting. So, Adam, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Reformation, but I actually have one question first, before we jump into the Bible here, which is, what really sparked your curiosity? Why do you like history so much? Why did you decide to say, I'm going to do this? What really, what makes what floats your boat in that space?
For me, I've always had an interest in history, not just biblical history, but world history, World War II history, social history, and so on. For me, what interests me about history is I only find it interesting when you can see the connection between what you're reading or studying to today. I remember when I was in school and we were studying social and economic history, it was interesting to say, that law was passed, 100 years ago. It's still around today, or the impact of it is still today. So kind of how can you stretch what's happened then until the present day and see its impact today? I think when you refer that to the Reformation, what makes it interesting is not learning the dates or the facts or the figures of this particular character, but seeing what they did then, whether it's 200 years ago or 500 years ago, and there's still an impact today. Now, sometimes people don't know the connection between what's happening today and the past, and I think that's the interesting part of, these guys studied this then, or recovered this particular teaching, in 1530, and that's what we practice today. And so, we owe, in a sense, a debt of gratitude to these reformers and what they did, because we're still doing some of the things they've talked about, and it's good to know that connection between our present practice and where it comes from.
Love it. That's fascinating. Look, my brain works, I believe, in similar ways to yours, because I love history, and I love how you frame it around, understanding how things work. Because I guess this is the equivalent for an engineer to look at a machine and be questioning and saying, hey, how does that actually work? What are the wheels and the pieces and the parts? But this is for human history. So why do we do the things today? Why, what need existed in the past, and what was the process through which it was developed, so that we still stick with it? And sometimes there's multiple stops in the journey. Sometimes we look at some history that appears to be uncorrelated to what we're doing today, but that sparked something, and that something sparked something that we're doing today. And it's really fascinating to see the development of the history of these ideas, and why we are the way that we are today. That's actually what's at stake in the end of the day.
I guess there's some people listening. There's a lot of people who may be listening who, when they were in school, college, or wherever, would have thought or heard the phrase, history is boring.
I'm sitting right in front of you.
Yeah,
history was the most boring subject for me in high school.
It is boring when it's studied. In order to pass this test, you've got to memorize these dates, you've got to memorize these events, and you've got to memorize these figures. And you memorize these factual information. Okay, in this day, this king was took over from this king or whatever. And in that sense, history is boring if you're just looking at dates, facts, figures. The only interest of history, I think, is when you're looking at the lessons of history, the connections between the past and the present, and how the past has impacted the present. And that brings life to it when you can see, why something happened, how it happened. And I think a lot of history teachers, there's some good ones out there, but sometimes when it's just regurgitation of information with no lessons, no morals, no impact, then it's boring. So in how we retell history with lineage, we try to always, we give the facts and the information, but at the same time we want to, what is the lessons we can learn from this? Why does this story matter today? And what can we glean from it?
Awesome. Look, I wish that my former history teacher could be listening to this podcast here. Well, let's get started here, because I am really excited with our journey. So I want to talk about just this idea, this concept of Reformation. People talk about the Reformation in history. What do they have in mind? Why do we use this term? And, just give us a little introduction about just that concept of Reformation.
I think that concept comes from this idea that something has been broken, in a sense, and it needs to be rebuilt or reformed. So there's a belief, there's an idea that's been deconstructed, and now we've got to reform it. We've got to bring back what was once there.
Okay, very good. All right, well, let's start then with the Bible. When we think about periods of something that was broken or something that was forgotten that needs to be restored, needs to be redeemed, when you look at the Bible, can we see periods where a kind of Reformation happened? And if you look at the Old Testament, where would you go as some examples of periods of Reformation?
I think the first place you'd go would be God's people. We believe starts with Abraham, and there's kind of a line that goes down, and they're supposed to inherit or live in what's called the Promised Land, or that part of the world today. They leave, around the time of Joseph, and Joseph goes to Egypt. And then the children of Israel, they're there in Egypt for several hundred years. So I think the first time you see that, and they may get impacted by Egyptian practices and beliefs and whatever while they're there, and God calls his people out. He says, I need you to go back to the land that I promised you. And there was a reason or a purpose for why they were there in Egypt. There was a famine and things like that. But so the first, in a sense, is this actual moving of a people. I'm going to move you from one country to another, because that's the land I want to inherit. And in the process of physically moving, they also have to unlearn some of the practices they've learned there, some of the beliefs they've learned there, and learn to trust in God wholeheartedly again, which takes them a little bit of time. It's not something they learn overnight. So I think that's really the first, where he's moving a people, teaching them to trust in him as they move.
Yeah.
When they get to Israel, there's then different episodes of their history where you have peaks and troughs and peaks and troughs. And I think you see certain reformations again later on.
Yeah, because let's just explore a little bit of that idea of living in Egypt for 400 years. What were the kinds of things that you imagine the Israelites would have had forgotten regarding the faith of their forefather Abraham, that God was in need? You mentioned this element of, trusting in God. So if they're not trusting in God anymore, what they were trusting in, and why were they trusting something other than God? Why would anyone really trust into anything that other than God?
I mean, they get to a point in their time in Egypt where they're slaves. And in a literal sense, you're relying on your master. You're relying on the state. You're relying on this infrastructure to feed you, to clothe you, to give you a job and everything else. I mean, so I think in that sense, they've left their reliance in a very real sense. If they're farmers in a field, or if they're doing whatever jobs, they're not free anymore. They're reliant on a human system.
Absolutely. And you think that the Egyptian religion, because the Egyptians, they worship many gods, and that it's a cow god, and the bird faced god, and the jackal headed god. They had a god for everything. They had their own ideas of how people could get saved. You had the whole mummification and the scarab beetles made of stone that they place in their heart.
I think there's this contrast as well. If the Egyptians have these gods and they're ruling over you, and you believe in, you say one God, or one true God, and yet you're in servitude for generations, there's, at what point does it make the children question if the God that their parents have taught them about is as powerful as they say he is?
Absolutely. And there's also this element, I remember, I think of this episode I believe it's in the book of Exodus, where people were there, they were no longer slaves anymore, but they're not necessarily liking their experience wandering around the desert. And sometimes say, you know what, we miss being in Egypt so much. Oh, in Egypt we could eat as much as we wanted to. There's meat in our pots, and there's the lentils and the garlic and all these kinds of things. So it was not only a reformation of theological ideas and concepts,
life practices,
but it's even of a lifestyle that they were missing out. And God said, "Hey, look, I actually have a new plan for you, a better plan for you, for you." So this is I think you pointed well, the first time where we can see this mass reformation, where God had to bring them to a new land, to get them used to a new lifestyle, and most importantly, to really recuperate their trust in God, the very trust that Abraham, their father, had in God. And they would be questioning, where is that God? Because we have been slaves for so many years. Has God abandoned us? Is the God of our fathers weaker than the gods of Egypt? And I think that God made it very clear to them, saying, look, the gods of Egypt were absolutely nothing, next to me. There had to be some other explanation about why they were in Egypt. And God told Abraham, he said, look, Abraham, it is for your sake, it's for their sake. It's for, I have a plan here, all of that. I love how you pointed that up as the first Reformation. We are giving away a book. Now, you have a book right in front of you today. It's a lineage version of The Great Controversy. Can you just tell us very shortly what it is about?
Sure. The book Great Controversy, it deals with a huge span of past, present, and future. So it starts back with like some of the early Christian struggles for freedom. It comes to the present day and it goes all the way into the future and all the way up to the second coming and past the second coming. So it kind of is an exciting time period. It's a broad sweep of history showing the battle between good and evil that has transpired through the centuries and how that's played out really down here on planet Earth and what the implications are for us as players in that controversy. So it's fascinating. It goes through the stories of reformers. It goes through the story of reformatory movements. It goes through the story of how doctrine was rediscovered in the Reformation. It's a fascinating book.
Yeah.
You're listening to the Breakfast Show podcast on Faith FM. Positively different.
Today is a special episode with Adam Ramdin on the history of the Reformation. So we have been talking about the Reformation in the Old Testament, particularly the first Reformation. The first reformer was God himself through Moses. Moses was the human agent. I think that of all reformations, we can say God is the one behind and behind the scenes driving it all. But Moses was the first one to reform the long forgotten faith, elements of the faith of the Jews into something real so that they could become a new nation. So we're going to be looking at other examples of Reformation in the New Testament. We also have to give the answer to the quiz question. I'm actually going to give the answer to the quiz question by a message that we got here, Producer Shell. This is by Sherry, and Sherry said, "Good morning. I think it's Martin Luther's thesis. Oh, I can't remember the name, but welcome, Pastor Adam. I watch Lineage avidly."
Oh,
blessings,
great.
Sherry. So there you go.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sherry. So the name of the document, what is it, Pastor Adam? What's the name of the document that we're after?
Commonly known as the 95 Theses.
The 95 Theses. We're going to be looking more about
95 points to it.
Okay, so there's 95 points to it that Martin Luther was challenging some of what he realized were non-biblical practices of the Catholic Church around his time. So we're going to be looking into that very, very shortly in today's episode, so stay tuned for that one. It's 3 hours worth of history bliss. This is how I call it.
So what was the controversy you were going to mention?
It's amongst some academics. Was it nailed to the door or was it posted with candle wax?
I think it's blue tack. Blue tack was invented back
nailed
then.
sounds much more romantic.
Yeah.
Candle wax.
Candle wax sounds a little bit. That's right.
A lot harder.
Because I'm thinking here, because they used to use the church doors were like the social media at the time, wasn't it? Like people would post kind of all kinds of community notices there, challenges and debates and news. So if you're nailing it, like at some point you're going to be ended up, splintering that door big time.
I don't think he would have minded that. I do think, he would have had to have gotten the candle wax from something that would have been close to the doors because he wouldn't necessarily be just carrying it.
Either way.
It was stuck there.
The fact is, it was stuck there.
All right, let's have another question.
All right, please, Producer Shell.
All right, and this one I'll let you guys answer if you want to. You can play along, but you can't say it out loud, so you have to just show it to me on your computer screen if you know the answer, which I'm sure you will. Which Czech reformer, over a century before Luther, preached against corruption in the church and was burned at the stake in 1415?
I know this one.
We've got it. Well done. Good job. Yeah. Okay.
One of my favorites, may I say.
Oh, good.
Yeah, in the list of reformers, I think he's really high up as some of my favorites. Just because he's such a brave guy, this one.
Yeah.
Very courageous dude.
Wow. 0491-064-669. Text in what you think the answer is to our quiz question. Which Czech reformer, over a century before Luther, preached against corruption in the church and was burned at the stake in 1415? Yeah.
And we have to make these guys' history great again. No pun intended here, because particularly in the Czech Republic, I believe that Czech Republic is probably the most...
Don't give it away. Okay.
No, I'm not going to give away. But I think it's the most atheist country in Europe today.
Very secular, yeah. Very.
Very secular.
Yeah.
And they were once home to one of the greatest reformers of Christian history.
Yeah.
So just something there. We're going to definitely be talking about him later today in the show. So, Adam, we were talking about reformations in the Old Testament. Can we briefly think of other stories where there was some kind of reformation where the people forgot something and then God brought someone else to, hey, remind them to get back into...
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, you got Samuel. There was a reformation, I guess you could call it, during his time period, where there was really a spiritual revival of turning Israel back to God. They removed the foreign idols, the gods to Baal and things like that. So that was a key period in Israelite history. So Samuel is he definitely, you could associate with reformation and revival that happens in Israel. King Josiah is another one. Israel has wandered far from God at that point, to the point they don't even, in a sense, know where the Bible or the scrolls are. And he finds one, like, oh, what is this? You know, like,
it's kind of wild to think that Israel lost the scriptures for a long period of time.
And then he finds it, like, oh, let's have a read of that. And as they read it, oh, wow. Yeah. And that begins a renewed revival back to God. And those are kind of, I think they're known because they're so stark, like there was what was before and then what was during and what was after. So those are two key periods, Josiah, Samuel. You know, in the book of Judges, each time you have Israel, they slip into sin, they slip into apostasy, or whatever you want to call it. They kind of wander from God, and then a judge, there's 12 of them in the book of Judges, arises and brings them back, delivers them from their captors, and brings them back to God. And then while the judge is alive, everything's fine, and then the judge dies, and they forget, and they slip back, and then you have this up and down cycle. Yeah. And so you have good kings, bad kings.
Actually, it makes me think here, when you look at particularly, I think that the Bible as a whole, and we're going to move to the New Testament in a moment, but when you look at the Old Testament, I think you could see that the Old Testament is the history of reformations, many reformations. Because when you look at the job of the prophets, what were they doing if not...
Call them back to God.
Call them back to the law of Moses, call them back to faithfulness to God and trust in God.
You've got, I mean, the children of Israel go so much into sin that God says, you know what, I'm going to take you guys into captivity to Babylon, which is kind of radical. Yeah. But then, God, 70 years later, they're allowed to go back home and they rebuild the temple. So that's another time of, I guess you could say, reformation in Israel. As they go back, they rebuild the temple and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and so on.
Wow, amazing. Now let's move on to the New Testament here, because between the Old Testament and the New Testament, there's a long time span. It's about 400 years.
Yeah.
And so a lot of things can happen in 400 years. Well, the Israelites were 400 years in Egypt, and they were in need of a big reformation after that. Yeah. Was that the case during these, what they call the intertestamental period? These 400 years of, there's no prophet, no prophetic activity, between the last, I believe, Malachi and Zechariah, some of the last writers of the Old Testament, all the way to Jesus and John the Baptist. What was the Reformation, if any, that was needed at the time of Jesus, and how was Jesus now becoming a reformer? Or was he a reformer?
Yeah, it's good, because I think when you look at, if there's a contrast, in the Old Testament, Israel's, what causes Israel to go into sin, I guess you'd say, is that they copy the nations around them. And so the nations that are worshiping the sun, they start to worship the sun, even in the temple, the book of Ezekiel says. So the sin of Israel in the Old Testament is very overt, it's very blatant, it's very much out there. Like, you guys are worshiping Baal, we worship Baal. You guys are worshiping the sun, we worship the sun. And so the reformations in the Old Testament are calling people, hey, stop doing all these external things. So then you have a situation where when they rebuild the temple in Israel, they're like, the reason why we went into captivity to Babylon and Medo-Persia was because we were doing all of these external acts that were against God. So they come back to Jerusalem, they rebuild the temple, and now they say, you know what? In order to ensure that we never go back into captivity again, let's make a whole bunch of rules that define how we worship God. So Israel goes from being this nation that does all these crazy stuff to now they've become this super regimented form of religion, in a sense, to ensure they don't go back this way. But in so doing, they become just as I don't to one that they wander so far from God still. While they're trying to worship God, they're not worshiping God. And so I think in the New Testament time, you've got Israel that's doing everything right.
From an outward perspective.
From an outward perspective, they're following all these rules. You can't walk this far on the day of worship, and you can't do this, and you can't do this. And they've got all these rules defining how to obey God, that they've missed the complete heart of worship. And so while they're not doing anything overtly like worshiping the sun or like worshiping the god Dagon, they still have accepted the heart of pagan worship, which is that I can justify myself. And Jesus comes in the New Testament to do away with this form of fake religion and bring people back to what true religion is. And so the Reformation, I think, that Jesus brings is not so like Samuel and Josiah, we've got to get rid of these foreign gods. It's more like, okay, you guys think you're doing well. Like, you guys think you're worshiping me, but let me tell you what true worship really is.
Wow.
And so Jesus really kind of exposes that, you can think you're a Jew, or you can think you're worshiping God, you can think you're doing all the right things, but what's the heart? And so he brings people back to what the real kind of issue is. So you've got this contrast. Israel kind of goes far to the left, then they go super far to the right, and both times they miss what worship is.
Yes, absolutely. It's like Jesus, if in the Old Testament we see the prophets wanting to reform the religious practices or get people back to the law of Moses and so on, which also talks about the heart bits.
It does, yeah.
But Jesus' reformation is a reformation of the heart, primarily. Yeah. Jesus saying, look, you have heard what it has been said to you in the past. You shall not commit murder. Sure, but I'll tell you, if you're calling your brother a fool in your heart, you're already committing murder.
Yeah.
You're not paying attention to what's in your heart. It's not that these things were not there in the Old Testament; they were. You say, "Hey, it's good that you were doing the external side of things, but let's think a little bit deeper and let's talk about the heart stuff that I wrote to you all along, and that you're not practicing those, and those are even more importance than the external ones, because there's no point of you're like a whitewashed sepulcher." I think that Jesus used that word, and the Pharisees, they didn't really like it a lot. And I think that, do you think that today, like, is this like a human tendency or phenomenon that we see today, either going to one side or to the other side, and we need to sort of experience that reformation of this coherence between the external and the internal ourselves?
Yeah, we do, because I think, it's so easy to think of religion as something external, and we live in a society where we're always trying to impress or influence other people's opinion of ourselves, and it's easiest to do that through something you externally do, whereas true religion starts inside and then flows out, which all comes down to the motive and so on, and that's what Jesus was talking about, like why are you doing what you're doing? Like, you're giving money in the temple. There's a story about giving money in the temple, and one person gives a lot of money, another person gives a little money, and Jesus says, which one of these two has worshipped me? And he's like, the one who gives the numerically little has worshipped me more than the one who gives a lot, because she's given more of what she has. And so he's teaching constantly about the heart and about the motive and what true religion is, and for us today, that's still relevant. It's still, that message has never lost its relevance through time.
But can we say, because someone comes to you and says, Adam, that's fine. Okay, I got it. So the message of Jesus, the religion of the heart, and all of the external things that the Pharisees was doing were wrong. So can I just get content? Okay, I'm just going to worship God in my heart, but I also not going to pay attention to, let's say, the external elements of what this worshiping of God looks like. People can say about keeping the Sabbath, or respecting some of the dietary guidelines of the Old Testament, and so on. So are these things of no importance whatsoever? How would you, what is their place? Were they only intended for a certain period of time? What's your take? How do we reconcile these both ideas here? Is the heart only? Is the external only? Or can these two somehow mingle together?
Yeah. And I think that's an important question. And in the Bible, you can find both. You can find texts that deal with the heart, texts that deal with the external. And it's not a case of either or. an either or way of thinking is either this or that. It's a case of both and, because some of those things you do mention, that there are texts in the Bible that very clearly specify, okay, you need to worship me, and I want you to worship me this time, and I want you to worship on this day, and so on. And so it's a case of both making sure that the motive and why you're doing it internally is there, but then there's also an importance in following, what God has asked us to do and spending that time with Him, or eating this way or doing this way, and so on. So I think you can't escape some of the things that God has said that He expects or He's asked His church to do. You can't just minimize that and just delete that from Scripture. But then at the same time, if that is true, in what manner or how is it that we should engage with that?
There is a harmony between these two things, between let's say the heart-based commands and the hand-based commands, so to speak.
Yeah.
So what about the apostles? Can we place the apostles as well in the category of reformers? Because they were kind of acting as prophets, but to the things that Jesus said. How would you classify the apostles in that story?
Good question. I mean, they really, in a sense, are the ones who start the Christian era. And so, they had some challenges or struggles where it was largely a Jewish-based religion. I mean, most of them were all Jews. And then they're kind of coming out of that and forming Christianity. And they still had to, in a sense, reform some of their thinking and get rid of some practices that they'd inherited just as being Jews that were no longer, in a sense, required in the Christian era, and especially as they brought non-Jews into the church or Gentiles.
That was a big innovation for them. I mean, again, has been in the scriptures all along. Jesus made it super clear. Sometimes he would go to one outside country. I'm thinking about the Syrophoenician lady, just to talk to her and then come back. So Jesus planted that seed very strongly. But then I think that was one of the big innovations in the days of the apostles, was to really bring that message of salvation to non-Jews.
Yeah. And I mean, Bible texts that we talk of so common now, like take the gospel to the world, was revolutionary back then, Yeah. And they lived that out, the apostles. They say, okay, you know what? Let's go out all over the world and let's go beyond our borders.
Oh, that's very interesting. So we can see there's these movements of Reformation, and one of the themes of Reformation that appear very clearly in the Bible, particularly I think in the life of Jesus and in the life of the apostles, is the resistance that they were facing. I mean, they're not just doing this, and people say, you do your thing, we do our thing. They are stimulating a fierce opposition to them. People were threatening them and throwing them in jails, taking their lives. They were really stirring the hornet's nest here with those ideas. Even though these ideas were in themselves peaceful, they have not been met peacefully.
Yeah. I mean, society back then and for most of history wasn't really a society that allowed a divergence of opinion. And so whichever was the dominant view, that's what everyone has to believe. And you come along believing different, it's a threat to the status quo. And even though they were trying to, they're not trying to take over and, force people. It's a religion of, kind of peace and freedom and a freedom of conscience. The fact that someone was different is an affront to the power of the state.
And we're going to be looking to that more today, because the reformers, in the Christian reformers later down the track, will face similar challenges themselves, aren't they? You're listening to The Breakfast Show here on Faith FM. We're going to reveal the answer to the quiz question now. So producer Shell was asking the name of the Czech reformer, a famous Czech reformer. So who was he, producer Shell?
John Huss?
John Huss, yes. One of the things that I love about John Huss is that he kind of prophesied about Martin Luther coming down the track 60-something years later. He says, look, you're just killing the old goose here, but there's going to be a swan later on down the track that it's going to be a much harder pill to swallow than myself.
Yeah. And he I don't know, his story, in a sense, saves Luther's life 100 years later.
Oh, really?
Because when he went to Constance, he had the protection of the religious authorities that he would not be captured. And then he gets there, the emperor told him, you're safe.
Wow.
When he gets there, he's put straight in prison. And at his trial, he says, I came here in good faith that the emperor would give me safe passage. And history says that everyone turns and looks at the emperor, and he turns crimson red, like embarrassed. 100 years later, when Luther's on trial, and they want him to, some people say, hey, let's lock him up. One of the leaders says, I do not want to blush red like Sigismund.
Wow.
So he's like,
Amazing.
We could, but I don't want to be like Sigismund, and I don't want to be embarrassed.
Wow, there you go. Well, this is what we are up for today. We are going to have a special program today. We're having already a special program on the Reformation. So stay tuned. We're going to be exploring what happened. How did the church got deformed in the first place? How did we end up even in a need for a Reformation? So that's coming up.
Thanks for being a part of the Faith FM family. Join our community on Facebook or get in touch at 1-800-FAITH-FM.